You are listening to Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. I'm your host, Josh Lucas, and at Method, our vision is to connect technology with humanity for a simpler digital future. Join us as we speak with leading experts to discuss industry trends, best practices, and emerging technology that can help you and your organization craft better digital products and experiences. This episode is from a tech talk we hosted in our Method office. We host these discussions once a month, and if you like what you hear, we would love for you to join us live either in person or virtually. You can find more details about our Tech Talk schedule at method.com. Now, let's jump in.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. We're super excited to have everyone. These are our Tech Talks. We're having them once a month. We're excited. Our panel here, who we're going to introduce here in a second. But I will mention that we've got an event upcoming on September 19th, which is going to be unlocking value creation opportunities in your data. So again, focused on data and AI. Lucene, our head of data and AI, is going to be the panel host with Paul from who's the head of innovation at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, and Joe, who runs data and analytics at Truist. So we're super excited to have them as well. So, but as we get started here, I am going to introduce our panelists, and they can join and come up here. So excited to have Andy Lucem. He's our principal strategist here at Method, along with Alejandro and Sean. And we'll have them come up, and they'll kind of give a little background about themselves. So let's give it up for these guys.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for making the time to be here to have lunch and listen to these two brilliant guys. These gentlemen talk a bit about AI. I had the pleasure of meeting with them a couple weeks ago as we were prepping for this conversation, and just left it really excited for what we have to share, and also just inspired for where things are going within the healthcare space, specifically where it relates to AI. As Brad mentioned, my name is Andy Lucem, principal strategist here at Method. I support both our consumer and healthcare practice. And in that work, I get to work with lots of our teams across design, strategy, engineering, as well as within our parent and grandparent organizations, GlobalLogic and Hitachi, teams working on AI projects specifically, seeing a lot of really exciting things going on in the industry. And I think that these two guys are great examples of people who are boots on the ground, really changing and seeing what's happening out there. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in, let these guys give a quick introduction of themselves. As we're talking, let's start with Sean. Give us a brief introduction and a little bit of background on Lucem.
Okay, I'll try to lower the bar here. So thanks, Andy. Thanks to Method for hosting this, and for all of you for attending. I'm Sean Cassidy. I'm the CEO of Lucem Health. We are based here in the Charlotte area, technically in Davidson. We are a fully remote workforce, as many companies are these days. We started the company in 2021 with Mayo Clinic. And the founding idea for the company was that we were trying to solve the so-called bench to bedside problem for clinically focused AI. That is, how do we get all this interesting innovation from research mode, from data science mode, actually into clinical workflow? I think we'll talk more about it later, so I won't steal my own thunder. We've actually pivoted the business, as startups often do. About myself, I'm an old digital health guy. I've been in digital health for my sins for about 20 years now, and in enterprise software for a long time before that. And so, yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Alejandro? All right. How you guys doing? So Alejandro Reti. I am a physician, also a lifetime digital health person. And a little bit about me. So I was most previously running a remote patient monitoring business for Optum United Health, and serving as a CMIO for a division of Optum, which basically did all the development work for Optum Health. And that included a large portfolio of various AI projects on both the payer and provider delivery side. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from. And yeah, it's been a long time, but Sean and I used to work together once upon a time here in Charlotte many moons ago. So anyway, I've been to a bunch of these talks, and sometimes they are conversational. Sometimes people come in with sort of a topic that they speak on frequently. What we decided to do here is something that's really free flowing. We both have a lot of experience and exposure to what's happening in the AI world in healthcare, and what we wanted to do is kind of give you guys some insight into what's happening and where the opportunity we feel is here.
Awesome.
When we met a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this talk, and the title of AI in healthcare was a little too big almost. Sean, you made the point that healthcare is not really an industry, that it's really a collection of lots of different markets. Could you talk a little bit about the different spaces and sort of unpack healthcare for us more broadly, and how you see AIs fitting into those many markets?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of nooks and crannies in healthcare, but if you think about it in that's sort of the biggest terms, the big rocks, if you like, obviously there are healthcare provider organizations, large and small. We have large integrated delivery networks and health systems. Like here in Charlotte, we have Atrium Health, we have Novant. And so they're basically full service shops. You have small practices still, although less of them as days go by, and everything in between. So we've got the provider market, we've got the payer market. And so we have commercial payers like United Health Group, which owns Optum, where Alejandro used to work. And obviously we have the federal government, we have CMS, Medicare and Medicaid, who are 9,000-pound gorillas in the healthcare market and heavily influential in terms of how things are reimbursed and paid for. And then let's not forget the life sciences side of the equation, right? So we have pharmaceutical companies, medical device manufacturers, and others. And I think we all understand intuitively what they provide into the market. And there are lots of other sort of different facets of healthcare we could talk about. You may want to pile on. We can, and I guess we'll get to this, every one of those sort of constituencies or stakeholder types are using AI in different ways. They're innovating in different ways. They see the disruptive power of AI, I think, in different ways. And some are, as we'll see, more cautious than others. I don't know if you wanted to, share any other thoughts about the market broadly, Alejandro.
Yeah, I mean, another way to think about carving it up is like what general use case category is the AI being deployed to address? So, there's a clinical and non-clinical breakout, which I think is really important because on the clinical side, you have to think really carefully about the regulatory impact of what you're doing and whether your solution will be regulated. And that's a whole nother conversation because the FDA is still really trying to figure out how to regulate AI solutions in this space, and there's still lack of clarity in some very important areas. Although it's gotten a lot better in the last 18 months. So clinical, there's clinical decision support, and there are a number of different areas of medicine where, that's more advanced, like in radiology and pathology, and then becoming more evolved in areas like ambulatory practice and sort of cognitive decision making, and even in the surgical field, some really neat solutions come into play there as well. Then I think there's a whole other bucket around workflow. And I think this is really where most of the big players are investing to start, is where are there messy interfaces between human to human or human to kind of crappy portal today, where we can take away a lot of the friction from that interface and make it better, or do a job entirely, like medical scribing is a good example where people spend a lot of time writing things. Well, they don't actually have to write anymore. So that's sort of just another way that I like to think about some of the big categories.
Yeah, that's great. Interested to hear any specific use cases or concepts or ideas that you're seeing out in the market. I was reading this morning about a team at UNC Health that is working on an algorithm to that scans EHR data for better organ donor transplant data. Basically, looking to evaluate and refer the right candidates for organ donor. And that, has traditionally been a very manual process going through that data. So
just curious about specific use cases that you're seeing recently that have piqued your interest or gotten you excited.
Yeah, I mean, well, the analog to what UNC is doing is what a lot of life sciences companies are doing for clinical trials. So patient selection for clinical trials is really, really difficult. It's unbelievably expensive. And there are good candidates for certain trials and bad candidates for trials. And sometimes it's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff. And there's a lot of use of AI being applied to that problem. I am not an expert on life sciences use cases, by the way, so maybe we just put that one to the side for the moment. I will tell you what we're doing, since you didn't ask, but we think it's kind of innovative. So we built this sort of general purpose deployment platform for AI. It's sort of a Swiss Army knife thing, and selling platforms to healthcare providers, which is where we're focused, is just about the dumbest business you can be in right now. So we toiled away at that for a little while until we finally realized this is the dumbest business we could be in. But what we learned along the way was that we could apply this bucket of bits that we built to something really interesting, which is helping providers detect diseases earlier. There's all this data sitting at providers in EMRs and in other modalities. And literally what's represented in that data are thousands of undiagnosed cancers and chronic diseases. And until recently, we weren't able to figure out, which patients may be at higher risk of diseases. Yeah, there's statistical techniques. There's been some crude approaches. But with machine learning and AI advancements, we've gotten to the point where we can actually mine that data. We can identify in a very targeted way patients who may be at higher risk for certain diseases, cancers, CKD, diabetes, et cetera. And then what we do is we just flag those patients, and then we just surface those lists basically to healthcare providers, and then have the providers reach out to the patients and have an interesting conversation with patients. So I want to tell you the story real quick, because it's not just about the damn AI guys, okay? It's about the workflow. It's about the process. It's about what you wrap around it that really counts. So yeah, there's this powerful engine in the middle of the car that we've built, but the rest of the process is really important. And it turns out that when a healthcare provider reaches out to you, Alejandro, and says, "No, Alejandro, you're overdue for your colonoscopy. I know, I don't like the prep, and it's invasive, and I'm scared of what I might find or whatever." Well, Alejandro, we did a proactive review of your chart, and we found out that you may be at higher risk for a significant finding when you come into the GI suite for your colonoscopy, up to and including colorectal cancer, which you definitely don't want. If we catch that early, it's highly treatable. Ali, can we schedule you for your colonoscopy now, please? 70% of patients respond favorably to that. So we're using AI to help providers deliver more proactive care, to practice more at the top of their license, and they're finding in that example more cancers. 10 times more cancers in those patients that we flag versus randomly selecting from the population. And let's be crass about it, okay? In the market we're in, there is real treatment revenue associated with those cancers. And so there is a financial ROI as well as a clinical ROI associated with the deployment of that solution. Every one of our, I'm sorry, this sounds like a sales pitch, okay? But it is an innovative way to use AI with existing data that's non-interruptive to the clinical workflow. Let's medicine be practiced the way it is today, not robots in the exam room. And I think when we think about the use of AI in healthcare, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, we have to be really, really careful, particularly on the provider side, on the clinical and the delivery side, that we're not trying to push the envelope too fast, right? Medicine is grounded in science. It is slow to change. We can't Silicon Valley-ify medicine. Many have tried and many have failed. I'll get down off my stump and let you talk. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more about the importance of understanding the workflow and the ecosystem you're going to be plopping this solution into and making sure that it's going to work the way healthcare works in the real world. I think that's why you see a lot of these big companies who are traditionally platform companies like Google or Amazon try and getting involved in healthcare. Healthcare is difficult because you're not getting those platform margins. And the actual work on the ground is super local, it's super customized, and one size never fits all, right? I'll give you another example of an area that is just so exciting right now, and that's digital scribing. So, we had early adopters for years who used like Dragon software and would dictate their notes after their visits, and it would, electronically produce that list, and docs would go and edit things that the software got wrong, and then boom, publish a note. That's not efficient because you got multiple steps in that process. There are a number of companies out there now, some offering their services for free to providers, that listen to the conversation between a patient and a doctor ambiently and produce a beautifully structured, accurate note. What's interesting about this is, Gen AI is what's made this possible, really just in the last 2 years. I was surprised to see that over the course of 24 months, pretty much 80% of the providers that I talked with had piloted one of these solutions, was actively thinking about how to implement. The adoption curve on this has been remarkably fast for healthcare. And the reason is, it saves the average doc over 2 hours a day in time. And so, there are tons of opportunities like that in healthcare that are just so powerful. And just one more little thing on this. It is an immensely powerful spot in the healthcare transaction cycle to put in higher level decision support. So right now, they're just focused on grabbing real estate and putting in a nice new workflow to save the doc time. But now that you're in the exam room for the physician, you're listening and processing this conversation in real time, you can add decision support. You can quickly pop up, hey, there's a high risk of a certain diagnosis that's not being discussed, so we think you should address in the visit right now. Or, if you can talk about the following things, you can record the following diagnoses and then capture them from a revenue perspective, for your payer risk adjustment. Or, a quality gap in care that needs to be addressed before the conversation is over. The opportunity to influence what happens in that visit is really unlocked in a lot of ways, because now you're using the AI to process the note in this visit.
Don't you think that the first use case, which is the scribing, allows clinicians and leadership to get comfortable with the use of AI in that context? Because clinical decision support is obviously a big step forward from that. And I think that's what we're trying to do too. It's this idea that, the healthcare delivery organizations are conservative by design. I think we want them to be conservative. And so we're trying to figure out ways where they can dip their toes in the water and productively use AI so that ultimately we can move upstream into things like clinical decision support and diagnostics and so on, and really change the game for clinicians so that their jobs are less about the administrative headaches that they have to deal with today and more about actually serving patients, being creative, helping their patients navigate what is a complex, environment and can be a very scary situation. Wouldn't we all love our doctors to be able to do more of that rather than sitting at their desk going through charts, figuring out whether they got it right on the documentation side?
Alluded to it in the beginning, the regulatory environment. Though what I heard from you, Alejandro, is that adoption has been huge. And so I'm wondering here, is this idea of sort of, a progressive development, building trust over time, one way that we work with regulatory to introduce new technology? Or how would you respond to the question of regulatory constraints within this space?
Well, so the first thing I'll say is, the FDA is concerned with making sure care is delivered in a safe and effective fashion. And what you want to avoid doing, if possible, is doing clinical decision making or having too directive an impact on that clinical decision making. Because if you can't basically be considered a discretionary enforcement tool, your development path is totally different. The requirements
for documentation and testing and change control are very substantial. Your development timelines balloon, become much longer, and it's you end up building a different kind of company. So that's most of the development happening in the space is in the non-regulated areas, right? For obvious reasons, it's much faster to deal with, and especially as you get into the Gen AI space, I think there's a lot of lack of clarity on exactly how you are going to maintain your compliance with the FDA rules, given that you can't explain what your system is actually doing in all the traditional ways. So your way of validating what you're actually delivering, what you said you were going to deliver, is different than the traditional medical device space.
I'll put a little twist on that, and it's maybe a cautionary tale for those who are thinking about starting an AI-focused company in healthcare, which is this: you can't patent an algorithm. You can patent a molecule. And so the software as a medical device regulations that the FDA has produced, here's the problem. You have a novel idea for some diagnostic tool. You spend millions of dollars going through the process of getting FDA approval, a de novo, basically approval. And you've published papers along the way because that's what you need to do, right? So your recipe is basically out there in the world. And idiots like me can come along and we can basically piggyback on that, and we can replicate what you've done more or less in a matter of weeks instead of the years it took you. And we can get approval because you blazed the trail for us. So very, very difficult to be just an algorithm developer, a model developer in healthcare. That's why I emphasized that point earlier. It's about the car, the whole car, not just the engine, if that metaphor makes sense.
It does. It does make sense.
Excellent.
I think one thing that I've been hearing is from you guys is similar to a motto that we have at Method, which is to fall in love with problems and not solutions. And so I feel like a lot of times we see companies fall in love with solutions a la technology. And today's current flavor is AI, and not necessarily having a solidified problem that it's solving. How do companies or startups or people who are looking to solve problems or want to use this technology keep the focus on the problem?
Well, yes, they do have to keep the fact. How do you do it? Look, if you're trying to create a business, you have to understand the economic incentives, and you have to get aligned with those economic incentives. And these days, you can't just put something out there that's got some sort of rate of return. It has to have a significant rate of return. Every dollar invested must yield $10, $12, $15, whatever, of ROI, and you need to be able to demonstrate that. So yes, you cannot fall in love with technology. I'll tell you a little story. So in the early days of our existence, we were agnostic to what the AI was that was deployed on our platform. So we talked to a lot of AI innovators, and we saw some amazing stuff, really, really cool stuff. Now, this is 3 years ago with large language models, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. Things are changing rapidly, but really interesting. And we get so excited. And then we'd go back into our little hidey hole and we talk about it, and we're like, how the hell are we going to make money on this thing? If we build a car around their engine, what would be the economic value of the car? Who's going to buy this thing? And we saw a lot of Edsels. Another way I say it is we kissed a lot of frogs and didn't find a lot of princes or princesses in the process. So yes, one does have to be cautious, but make sure you can show what the economic value is of your solution, or forget about it, go do something else. I'm just imagining the kissing of frogs here. I also think here, I'll couch my answer not just sort of general, how do you be a good product person, but I'll make it specific about healthcare. I think one of the reasons healthcare is unique and a lot of people transitioning into healthcare struggle is you have a wider, more diverse range of stakeholders you need to solve a problem for. So for any given solution, right, you've got to solve the problem for the clinical team who's actually delivering on that transaction.
but you also have to solve the problem for the provider who needs to make sure they can make money and bill for whatever it is that you're doing. So there's some great AI stuff out there that's awesome, but you can't bill for it because, payers only pay if a licensed clinician does this thing. So dead, that solution is not going to work. You also have to understand how the payer sees it, and you have to make life better for the payer in terms of reducing overall cost of care. And that's a triangulation that's actually kind of hard, right? And a lot of stuff solves for 2 equations, but not 3. So, that's really the secret to a successful healthcare product. I think one thing that we're seeing quite a bit with AI and other disruptive technologies is the importance of change management. When we talk about introducing new technology into teams or into existing processes, it inevitably means change. And people might be still our biggest asset in healthcare, and people generally don't like change. So I'm curious, as the subtitle on this talk of bridging the gap from ideas to impact, when we move from ideas to impact, that inevitably means some amount of change. How do you work with teams to process that and align the incentives as you referenced before? Let me give an example to talk about this a little bit, because someone asked me, can we talk a little bit about digital mental health a little bit? And so I can kind of use an example there to weave this in. So there are actually a lot of companies out there right now working on tools to address the shortage in psychiatric providers and counselors, therapists, to deal with, we've got a lot of depression, anxiety, and other behavioral disorders mood disorders and behavioral disorders that are just not being addressed because it's either too expensive or the providers, patients can't get to them. And, a big pattern here is using AI to develop a program that basically the patient interacts with over a computer or even over the phone, but it's a program instead of a human on the other end. It either completely replaces the traditional therapeutic relationship or it augments it. So you can use 1/8 or 1/10 the actual therapy time and get a similar outcome. Now, let's just assume for a minute that company has been able to go through the effort of getting a regulatory approval. And so they're actually supported by the FDA in doing this. You still have the change management problem where you need to get psychiatrists comfortable with it and willing to refer to this, or primary care docs willing to refer a patient for this and prescribe it instead of going to a normal therapist and a normal round of therapy. It's a huge barrier for adoption for these companies. And so you have to start thinking about that change management. All right, how are we going to get providers comfortable to do the referral? How are we going to think about monitoring the therapy so that the referring provider is comfortable that it's actually working, and we can push the eject button for a patient if it's not working partway through? And then if necessary, how do we develop a different referral pathway, right? If the providers are just not going to refer, can we get the payers to refer patients somehow? And to generate a patient flow that way? Is this a direct-to-consumer play now? There's a lot of different angles to think about, but that's sort of a classic example, I think, right now, where you have a really wonderful whole segment that it actually works. I think we've seen enough examples where people have the evidence to show that this works, but the actual implementation and commercialization is challenging.
Yeah, that's a great example. I don't have a ton, to add other than to sort of refer back to something I said earlier, which is just particularly when it comes to providers, which Alejandro and I have a lot of experience with, we just can't push the change too fast. And so we have to figure out increments. And I think, the road is littered with failure of folks who've come in and with great ideas who've tried to blow up existing process and start again. And it's just not going to happen. So we've got to get people comfortable with these tools, with these technologies, whether in their jobs or at home. We've got to figure out how to explain what they can do and what they can't do, what the risks are. we've got to start to subtly shift perspective and points of view on how AI can be used without coming in there guns blazing, if you'll pardon the expression, and saying, we're going to change everything about how you do your jobs. And oh, by the way, half of you won't have jobs at the end of it. Have a nice day.
Very hopeful note.
It'll get better in the next 20 minutes, I promise.
Thank you. Data is integral to making any of this work. And I think that in healthcare, all the more so, but all the more challenging, right? Getting real patient data is not easy to do the kind of work that lots of firms are trying to do. I read, I think there was a report in Nature Medical last week talking about medical AI devices, and it was essentially an audit that found a significant number of medical AI devices that have been developed in the last few years weren't developed on real patient data. It was all synthetic. And it's called into question trust of those devices. And so how do you think about data and privacy and the evolution of AI on top of that?
Okay, so this is a really interesting topic, right? If we had been having this conversation 6 to 12 months ago, one of the first things I would have said is, look, data is an incredibly important asset here because you need to have enough data to train a model to be able to produce, a credible output. And for certain types of AI use cases, like training in agents to identify a tumor in a radiology image or a pathology slide, that is largely true, still true. And there will continue to be ways that a data advantage, having more samples to train from, better data to train from, will give you a leg up in these kind of use cases. What I have been shocked to see is the number of use cases where data really hasn't made the output that much better than you would have thought. Okay, so I'll give you an example. You can take an off-the-shelf LLM model. You can turn it towards doing a scheduling call between a patient and basically be there on the patient end or the doctor end, but schedule a patient visit on behalf of the patient or get a patient enrolled into a program. You can do that without any data at all. The off-the-shelf model will do a serviceable job. Now, for some use cases, data becomes more important. So I talked about digital scribing. Those are typically trained on a corpus of clinical notes. And, so they know how to structure that physician note, and they know, how to separate, we talk about the SOAP note, the subjective, the objective, the assessment, the plan. Well, it turns out if you train a model on primary care data and you try and write a psychiatry note or an orthopedic note, okay, the doc's not going to like it, all right, because you're going to have the wrong mix of stuff. The terminology is not going to be quite right. It's going to be too long. But if you're able to kind of do some tuning of that model on a set of orthopedic notes, well, now you get an output that's much more useful. But it's not like you need a ton of them. You really only need a small amount. So I'm becoming more around to the fact that I think the data advantages are actually going to start coming down, and the proprietariness of the data out there. A lot of health systems are trying to sell their data to people. They think it's like super valuable. It's really not. This data is all around us. And I'll stop there. That's my view. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think we'll probably talk about LLMs more. So I'll put that to the side for a minute. I'll tell you what we're struggling with right now, which is is it a paradox? I don't know. But in order for us to be able to train the AI models that we are now developing, we need true positives and true negatives for the diseases that we're targeting. We didn't know for sure that this particular patient does not have chronic kidney disease, and we need to know that this particular patient does in fact have chronic kidney disease. Well, the problem is that the data that represents those patients, that's in EMRs and other modalities, it's dirty. And so we actually have to go through a process to curate that data. And sometimes we actually have to have doctors look at the data to make a determination. Can we, with a very high degree of certainty, declare that this patient, who, by the way, may have a positive diagnosis on their chart, does not actually, in fact, have the disease that is indicated on their chart. So this idea that healthcare data is some kind of panacea is not true. And so I do get the problem with the synthetic data, but there's also a problem in the real data. And somewhere there's an answer in there.
That's great. I want to leave a little time for Q&A. So I'm going to shift a little bit to kind of future outlook and where you see things going. Sean, you mentioned Ethan Malik, who's a business professor who recently wrote a book called Co-Intelligence. Really fantastic book. I recommend it if you haven't had a chance. He makes the point in the book that, we all have an LLM in our pockets right now, or we could if you haven't downloaded it yet. And that AI is simultaneously the best AI we've ever had, and it's also the worst we will ever have. It's only getting better. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on this technology for consumers and how they manage their own healthcare, but also where you see the trends going.
Yeah, I mean, we're all doomed. Let's just start there. No, it is unbelievable how quickly things are progressing. And I do think it gives us as consumers of healthcare, will give us more and more ability to have better agency over our own care and of our own interactions with these very scary professionals who have a dozen years, people like you who have a dozen years of education. And I think we're not intending, I don't think it's going to level the playing field per se, but it is going to change the way we can interact with our clinicians. Now, look, everybody in this room, and I assume most of the folks watching on the screen, probably educated people, college degrees, professionals. Great for us, right? We can walk in if we get a diagnosis and we can advocate. And we're going to use these tools to give us the information and make it coherent for us, which is really going to be key. What about people who don't necessarily have the same backgrounds we do? How is it going to level their playing field? I don't know. And I do worry that there is going to be a gap that's going to develop. There's going to be power users of generative AI and these sophisticated tools, and we're going to be able to be more creative in our jobs, we'll be more productive, we're going to make more money, it's going to be awesome. And there's going to be a whole lot of people who are going to be left behind. And I don't know how to square that circle just yet. So we're doomed.
No, I think I echo very much what you're saying. I think this round of AI is going to really revolutionize a lot of the pain points that we experience. Because so much of what sucks about healthcare is it's hard to get an appointment. It's difficult to deal with payment problems. You're on the phone all the time with in the most inefficient phone calls. I think that stuff is going to get a lot better in short order and is going to make the experience a lot better. I'd like to say it's going to be a democratizing influence on the space, but I actually think in a lot of ways it's going to make the incumbents even stronger, because at the end of the day, there are certain choke points in the healthcare system where your incumbents have huge advantages, and those are your big providers, and those are your big payers, and those are your platform tech providers. And so I think that in some ways, not to get too political about it, but a private healthcare system where it's dominated by really big incumbent corporations, things are going to continue to be fashioned in the best interests of those corporations' financial interests. And whether that aligns with the best interest of patients, I think always remains to be seen, and not something that we should be taking for granted.
Yeah, we worry about that as a startup. We feel like we're doing, making innovative use of technology. But I think the point that you made is really, really important, that it seems to be increasingly harder for innovation that is developed in somebody's garage or with a small team to find purchase, at least in the market that we're operating in, because there has been so much investment in technology platforms in healthcare. Providers, they're all on Epic now, right? They've all standardized on a very small number of technologies. how do you break in? Even if you've got a 10x, 20x better solution, it can be hard.
And I want to talk a little bit about the equity thing, because I think that's always, that's a big thing in the press. When I was with United, I mean, they're as part of the early stages of developing a full-fledged AI program, we spent a ton of time thinking about what health equity is and how it translates into day-to-day transactions, and how do you go through a rigorous process of demonstrating that what you've built is going to deliver equitable care out of the back end. And there's some real technical challenges there, especially if inequity is fundamentally baked into our healthcare system today. Because that means everything that actually happens in the real world is inequitable to begin with. So how do you build a system that somehow changes that? But the processes, it's not that difficult, and they're in place, right? You can pretty in a straightforward fashion determine whether your tool is biased or is going to be implemented in a biased way. So I'm less worried about being able to solve that problem. I'm just a little bit. I'm more worried about where we as a large industry choose to deploy these tools, with the most financial resources behind it.
Thank you for joining us on Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. If you would like to know more about how Method can partner with you and your organization, you can find more information at method.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on social and be sure to check out our monthly Tech Talks. You can find those on our website. And finally, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We'll see you next time.